The gunshot echoed across the vast Montana prairie, scattering a flock of startled birds into the crimson sunset sky of 1878. Emma Foster dropped the rabbits she'd been hunting and instinctively ducked behind a boulder, her heart pounding against her ribs. Another shot rang out, followed by an eerie silence that settled over the tall grass like a heavy blanket. Something wasn't right. The shots hadn't been aimed at her, they'd come from the direction of Cottonwood Creek, nearly half a mile away. Emma brushed a strand of auburn hair from her face and adjusted the worn hunting rifle in her calloused hands. At 23, she'd learned to trust her instincts above all else. 4 years alone on the frontier had taught her that much. She gathered her game, securing the rabbits to her belt before cautiously moving toward the creek, her boots crunching softly on the dry grass. As she approached the silver ribbon of water cutting through the golden landscape, she spotted him, a lone figure hunched beside a magnificent chestnut horse. Even from this distance, she could see the man's shoulders shaking. Emma hesitated, her finger hovering near the trigger of her rifle. Strangers meant danger in this unforgiving territory, but something about his posture spoke of grief rather than threat. She approached slowly, making enough noise with her footsteps that he would hear her coming. The last thing she wanted was to startle an armed man. "Mister?" she called, still keeping a safe distance. "You all right there?" The man whirled around, revealing a tear-streaked face partly hidden beneath the shadow of a dusty brown hat. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 27 or 28, with several days' worth of beard darkening his jawline and eyes the color of the Montana sky. His right hand moved instinctively to the pistol at his hip, but stopped when he registered she was a woman. "Don't come any closer," he warned, his voice hoarse. A body lay in the tall grass beside him, a man in a weathered duster, face down in the dirt. Emma tightened her grip on her rifle but didn't raise it. "I heard shots." The cowboy swallowed hard, looking between her and the body. "Wasn't me who killed him, if that's what you're thinking." "I didn't say it was," Emma replied carefully. She nodded toward the body. "Your friend," the cowboy's face crumpled and he turned away, one hand reaching out to rest on his horse's neck. "Lost my friend," he said simply, his voice breaking on the words. Something in his raw grief touched Emma's heart. She'd known loss too had carried its weight across hundreds of miles of prairie. Before common sense could stop her, she stepped closer and lowered her rifle. "You found me," she said softly. The man looked up, confusion momentarily replacing the sorrow in his eyes. "Madam, my name is Emma Foster," she continued, surprising herself with her openness. "I have a small homestead about 2 miles east of here. Whatever trouble you're in, you look like you could use a hot meal and somewhere to rest." The cowboy wiped his face with the back of his hand and straightened his shoulders. "Ethan Zachary," he replied, "and I ain't running from the law if that's what you're wondering." He glanced down at the body. "This here's Jimmy Wilson. We were delivering horses to Fort Benton when we got ambushed. Bandits took the horses and left Jimmy with a bullet in his back." Emma nodded grimly. She'd heard stories of horse thieves operating in the territory. The bandits still around? "No, they rode west with the horses about an hour ago." Emma considered her options. Night was falling, and it wasn't safe for either of them to be out in the open. "We should bury your friend before dark," she decided. "Then you can come back to my place. Tomorrow you can decide what you want to do about those thieves." Ethan studied her face, clearly trying to determine if she could be trusted. "Why would you help a stranger, Miss Foster?" Emma's lips curved into a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Because 4 years ago someone helped me when I needed it most. Besides, nobody should be alone after losing someone they care about." The truth was more complicated than that. Loneliness had been her only constant companion since her father died, and something about this grieving cowboy stirred emotions she'd long suppressed. But that wasn't something to share with a man she'd just met over the body of his friend. "I'd be obliged," Ethan finally said. "And I promise I won't bring trouble to your door." Together, they dug a grave using Emma's small shovel and Ethan's hunting knife. They worked in silence as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the prairie. When they finally lowered Jimmy's body into the earth, Ethan removed his hat and spoke a few quiet words over his friend. "We rode together for 3 years," he told Emma as they finished piling rocks over the grave to keep predators away. "Met during the war. He saved my life at Shiloh when I was just a fool kid who didn't know which end of a rifle to hold." Ethan's voice cracked. "I should have been watching our back trail better." "Those men would have killed you too if they'd had the chance," Emma said firmly. "You're alive to remember him. That counts for something." As darkness fell, they mounted their horses, Emma on her sturdy paint mare and Ethan on his chestnut gelding, and rode east across the moonlit prairie. The night air carried the scent of sage and distant rain as they followed the faint trail toward Emma's homestead. Neither realized that this chance meeting beside Cottonwood Creek would change both their lives forever. Emma's homestead came into view as they crested a small rise, a modest cabin with a barn and corral nestled against a backdrop of cottonwood trees. A thin wisp of smoke still rose from the chimney, evidence of the fire she'd banked before leaving to hunt that morning. "It's not much," she said, suddenly self-conscious as Ethan surveyed her home. "But it's mine." "You live here alone?" Ethan asked, surprise evident in his voice. Emma nodded. "Since my father passed 4 years ago. That's no small feat for anyone, let alone a woman on her own." There was genuine respect in his tone, not the condescension she often heard from men passing through. They dismounted, and Emma showed Ethan where to stable his horse. Inside the small barn, her milk cow lowed softly, and a few chickens shuffled on their roosts. After tending to the animals, Emma led the way to the cabin, lighting a lantern that cast a warm glow over the simple interior, a wooden table with 2 chairs, a small cooking area, a rocking chair beside the fireplace, and a curtained-off sleeping area in the corner. "I'll fix us something to eat," Emma said, hanging her rifle on pegs by the door. Ethan stood awkwardly just inside the threshold, hat in hands. "I can't remember the last time I was in a proper home," he admitted. "Been living in camps and bunkhouses for years now." "Well, the rules are simple here," Emma replied as she stoked the fire. "Wash up at the basin and don't track mud on my floors." A ghost of a smile touched Ethan's lips. "Yes, madam." While Emma prepared a simple meal of rabbit stew with the day's hunt, Ethan cleaned up at the wash basin. In the lantern light, she could see him more clearly, tall and lean with broad shoulders that spoke of years of hard work. His hands were calloused but gentle as he splashed water on his face, revealing more youthful features than she'd first thought beneath the grime and stubble. "How long have you been driving horses?" Emma asked as they sat down to eat. "Since the war ended," Ethan replied, seeming grateful for the conversation. "I was 16 when I joined up," lied about my age. "When it was over, I couldn't go back to Pennsylvania. Too many ghosts." He paused, taking a spoonful of stew. "This is mighty good, Miss Foster," Emma, she corrected, "and thank you." "Emma," he repeated, as if testing the name. "You mentioned your father, but what about the rest of your family? They must worry about you out here alone." Emma's expression clouded. "My mother died when I was 14. Father and I came west afterward. He had dreams of building something that would last." She gestured around the cabin. "We were doing well until the winter of '74. He caught pneumonia. By the time the weather cleared enough to fetch a doctor, it was too late." "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly. "It was a long time ago." Emma pushed her bowl away, suddenly not hungry. "The neighbors, the Hansons, wanted me to sell the place and go back east to live with my mother's sister in Boston, but I couldn't. This land was everything to my father, everything to me too." "It takes courage to stay," Ethan observed. Emma gave him a measured look. "What about you? You said you were delivering horses to Fort Benton. What happens now that the horses are gone?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Those horses belonged to the Army, worth nearly $2,000. Jimmy and I were responsible for them." He set down his spoon. "I aim to get them back, by yourself, against how many men?" "4 that I counted." Emma shook her head. "That's suicide, Mr. Zachary." "Ethan," he corrected with a tired smile, "and maybe so, but I don't see much choice. Those horses were my livelihood. Without them—" He trailed off, leaving the obvious unspoken. They finished their meal in silence, each lost in thought. As Emma cleared the dishes, she made a decision that surprised even her. "The sheriff in Clearwater might help," she said, her back to Ethan as she worked. "If we leave at first light, we could be there by midday." "We?" Ethan questioned. Emma turned to face him. "I know this territory better than you do." "The horse thieves likely headed for the Bitterroot Valley. There are plenty of places to hide stolen stock there." "I can't ask you to get involved in this," Ethan protested. "It's too dangerous." "You didn't ask," Emma pointed out. "I'm offering." "Besides, horse thieves are everyone's problem out here." Ethan studied her for a long moment before nodding. "All right, but at the first sign of real trouble, you head back home. I won't have another death on my conscience." Emma agreed, though they both knew it was an empty promise. Once on the trail, there would be no sending her home like an errant child. She prepared a makeshift bed for Ethan near the fireplace while he stepped outside to check on the horses one last time. When he returned, Emma was already behind the curtain in her sleeping area. Ethan settled onto the blankets by the fire, staring up at the log ceiling, his mind replaying the image of Jimmy falling from his horse, the look of surprise on his face as the bullet struck him. "Ethan," Emma's voice came softly through the darkness. "Yes, I'm sorry about your friend." Ethan closed his eyes, a lump forming in his throat. "Thank you," he managed. "Good night, Emma. Good night." As moonlight filtered through the small cabin windows, two strangers connected by tragedy and kindness finally succumbed to exhaustion, unaware that their lives had already begun to intertwine in ways neither could imagine. Dawn broke with a chorus of birdsong and the distant howl of a coyote. Emma rose first, moving quietly around the cabin as she prepared for the day ahead. She packed provisions, jerky, cornbread, coffee, and filled canteens with fresh water from the well. When she returned from feeding the animals, Ethan was awake, folding the blankets she had lent him. "I forgot to ask," she said, setting a pot of coffee on the stove. "Are you injured? I noticed you favoring your left side yesterday." Ethan hesitated, then lifted his shirt to reveal a crude bandage wrapped around his ribs. "One of them got a piece of me during the ambush. It's just a graze." Emma frowned. "Let me see it before we leave." Despite his protests, she insisted on cleaning and rebandaging the wound, a shallow furrow along his rib cage that had bled enough to soak through the original dressing. Her fingers worked deftly, and Ethan watched her face as she concentrated on the task, noting the sprinkling of freckles across her nose and the determined set of her jaw. "You've done this before," he observed. "Living alone means learning to take care of yourself," she replied, securing the fresh bandage. "My father taught me basic doctoring along with shooting and farming." "He sounds like a wise man." Emma's expression softened. "He was." She stepped back, assessing her handiwork. "That should hold, but we'll need to check it tonight." They ate a quick breakfast, then saddled their horses. Emma took one last look at her cabin before riding out, wondering briefly if she was making a mistake. She barely knew this man, yet here she was, riding off to help him recover stolen horses from dangerous outlaws. Something told her Ethan Zachary was worth the risk, though she couldn't have explained why. The morning air was crisp as they rode west toward Clearwater, following game trails through rolling grasslands. Emma led the way, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing bits of knowledge about the territory. Ethan listened, asking questions that revealed a genuine interest in both the land and her experiences. "How did you learn so much about tracking?" he asked after she identified Wolf's sign beside a stream where they stopped to water the horses. "The Blackfoot," Emma replied. "A group camped near our homestead the first winter after we arrived. Father traded with them fairly, and they taught me things in return." She smiled at the memory. "They called me Firehair because of this." She tugged at a lock of her auburn hair. "It suits you," Ethan said, then looked away quickly as if embarrassed by the comment. By midday, the small settlement of Clearwater came into view, a dusty main street flanked by wooden buildings, including a general store, saloon, and sheriff's office. Emma noticed Ethan's posture change as they approached, tension evident in the set of his shoulders. "Something wrong?" she asked quietly. "Just don't much like towns," he replied. "Too many people, too many eyes. They tied their horses at the hitching rail outside the sheriff's office. A weathered sign hung above the door, Sheriff Daniel Morgan. Inside, they found a barrel-chested man with iron-gray hair sitting behind a desk, cleaning a shotgun. He looked up as they entered, his bushy eyebrows rising at the sight of Emma. "Miss Foster," he greeted her, setting aside the weapon. "Don't often see you in town." His gaze shifted to Ethan, instantly becoming more guarded. "And who might you be, Mr. Ethan Zachary?" Ethan replied, removing his hat. "I was delivering horses to Fort Benton with my partner when we were ambushed near Cottonwood Creek yesterday. Bandits killed my friend and stole the horses." Sheriff Morgan's expression darkened. "Sit down, both of you." He pulled out chairs for them. "I've been hearing about horse thefts all along the territory. Sounds like the same gang." He looked at Emma. "How'd you get mixed up in this, Miss Foster?" Emma explained their meeting, carefully omitting the more personal aspects of their conversation. The sheriff listened, occasionally jotting notes on a scrap of paper. "4 men, you said," Morgan confirmed when Ethan described the attackers. "One with a scar across his chin, another wearing a cavalry coat." Ethan nodded, leaning forward. "You know them?" "Sounds like the Hadley brothers and their crew," Morgan growled. "Been causing trouble from here to Helena. Robbed the stage last month, killed the driver." He scratched his beard thoughtfully. "How many horses did they take?" 23 Army remounts, all branded with the U.S. mark. The sheriff whistled low. "That's a hefty haul." He stood and walked to a map pinned to the wall. "If it's the Hadleys, they've got a hideout somewhere in these hills." He pointed to a remote area west of Clearwater. "Problem is, it's a lot of territory to cover, and I've got no deputies since Wilkins quit last month." "I can track them," Ethan said firmly. "I just need to know which direction to start looking." Sheriff Morgan studied him for a moment. "You military during the war?" "Yes, sir, cavalry." "Thought so." Morgan nodded, coming to a decision. "I'll deputize you temporarily. Can't officially sanction a posse without more evidence, but I can give you the authority to recover stolen property." He glanced at Emma. "Though I'd feel better if Miss Foster here returned to her homestead." Emma straightened in her chair. "With all due respect, Sheriff, I know this territory as well as anyone, better than Mr. Zachary, certainly." "She's right," Ethan agreed, surprising both Emma and the sheriff. "We found tracks this morning that I would have missed entirely." "She reads sign like a Pawnee scout I once knew." Sheriff Morgan looked between them, then sighed deeply. "Fine, but neither of you is to engage these men directly. If you find the horses, you come back here and we'll organize properly." He fixed Ethan with a stern look. "I understand wanting revenge for your friend, son, but the Hadleys won't hesitate to put a bullet in either of you." After Ethan was sworn in as a temporary deputy, the sheriff provided what information he had on the Hadley gang, their known associates, suspected hiding places, and past criminal activities. By the time they left the office, the sun was already beginning its westward descent. "We should get supplies before the store closes," Emma suggested, nodding toward the general store across the street. "And perhaps a room at the boarding house for the night." Ethan shook his head. "If we ride out now, we can cover some ground before dark. The trail gets colder with every hour." "And if we stumble around in the dark, we might miss crucial sign," Emma countered. "One night won't make that much difference, and we'll both be fresher in the morning." Reluctantly, Ethan agreed. They purchased supplies at the general store: ammunition, more jerky, coffee, and medical supplies for Ethan's wound. The shopkeeper, a portly man named Harrison, kept glancing curiously at them. "Not often we see Miss Foster with company," he remarked as he wrapped their purchases in brown paper. "You two related?" "Mr. Zachary is helping me with some predators that have been troubling my livestock," Emma replied smoothly before Ethan could speak. "Sheriff Morgan suggested I find someone handy with a rifle." Harrison seemed to accept this explanation, though his eyebrows remained raised as they left the store. "Predators, huh?" Ethan murmured as they walked toward the small boarding house at the end of the street. "People talk in small towns," Emma explained. "Better they think you're working for me than know about stolen army horses. The last thing we need is some glory seeker trying to catch the thieves before us." Ethan looked at her with new appreciation. You're smarter than most men I've ridden with. Not a particularly high bar from what I've observed, Emma replied dryly. The boarding house had only one room available, a situation that caused Emma's cheeks to flush slightly as the owner, Mrs. Perkins, assumed they were married. I'll sleep in the stable with the horses, Ethan said once they were out of earshot. Emma shook her head. Don't be ridiculous. The room has 2 beds, we're adults, and neither of us is some delicate city flower with vapors. Despite her practical words, there was an undeniable awkwardness as they settled into the small room that evening. Emma sat on one narrow bed, combing her hair, while Ethan cleaned his revolver at the small table by the window, studiously avoiding looking in her direction. You never mentioned what you'll do after we find the horses, Emma said to break the silence. Ethan paused in his work. Continue to Fort Benton, I suppose, explain what happened, then. He shrugged. Find more work, keep moving. You don't have a place you call home, not for a long time. Ethan reassembled his revolver with practiced movements. What about you? Ever think about leaving your homestead, seeing what else is out there? Emma set down her comb, considering the question. Sometimes, she admitted. When winter's at its harshest or when I haven't spoken to another soul for weeks, she smiled faintly. But then spring comes and the land turns green again and I remember why I stayed. Must be nice, Ethan said quietly, having something worth staying for. Their eyes met across the room, and something unspoken passed between them, recognition of a shared loneliness, perhaps, or understanding of what it meant to forge a path alone in a harsh world. The moment was broken by shouts from the street below, drunken cowboys leaving the saloon. Ethan moved to the window, automatically checking for trouble while Emma blew out the lamp. We should get some rest, she said, her voice slightly unsteady. Tomorrow will be a long day. In the darkness, they each retreated to their separate beds, yet neither found sleep easily. Emma listened to Ethan's breathing across the room, wondering about the paths that had led them both to this moment. Ethan stared at the ceiling, thinking of Jimmy's grave beneath the Montana stars and the auburn-haired woman who had appeared like an angel of mercy at his lowest moment. Outside, a distant coyote called to the rising moon, its lonesome cry echoing across the sleeping town. They set out at first light, riding northwest toward the foothills where Sheriff Morgan believed the Hadley gang might be hiding. The morning was cool and clear, perfect for tracking. As they left Clearwater behind, Emma felt a familiar sense of freedom wash over her. The open country always affected her this way, reminding her why she'd chosen this life despite its hardships. Ethan rode beside her, alert and watchful. In the golden morning light, with his hat pushed back and the tension in his face softened, he looked younger, handsome in a weathered, frontier way. Emma found herself stealing glances at his profile when she thought he wouldn't notice. Tell me about the horses, she said as they followed a game trail through a stand of ponderosa pines. What makes them worth dying for? Ethan considered the question before answering. They're good stock, Morgan crosses mostly with some quarter-horse blood, smart, sure-footed. His face softened. There's a bay mare in particular, a beauty with a white blaze and 3 white socks, gentlest horse I've ever handled, but with fire when she runs. He smiled at the memory. I called her Duchess, though she's not mine to name. You love them, Emma observed. The horses, I mean, always have. Ethan nodded. When I was a boy in Pennsylvania, my father worked at a livery stable. I practically grew up in horse stalls. His smile faded. Lost him in '61, first year of the war, Confederate shell at Bull Run. Is that why you joined up? For revenge? Ethan shook his head. To provide for my mother and sisters. Military pay wasn't much, but it was something. He was quiet for a moment. They're all gone now, too. Fever took them in '63 while I was fighting at Gettysburg. Emma's heart ached for him. I'm sorry, Ethan. He straightened in the saddle. It was a long time ago. What about you? You never mentioned why you didn't go to Boston after your father died. Emma's hands tightened on the reins. My aunt made it clear I wasn't welcome unless I came as the proper young lady she remembered, not the wild creature I'd become out here. She laughed without humor. She offered to pay for finishing school to smooth my rough edges, as if I could go back to corsets and tea parties after knowing this freedom. They rode in companionable silence until midday, when they stopped in a sheltered gully to rest the horses and eat. As Emma spread out jerky and cornbread on a bandana, Ethan studied the distant hills through his field glasses. "There," he said suddenly, pointing. "See that thin line of smoke, too small for a campfire, more like a chimney." Emma squinted in the direction he indicated. "There shouldn't be any homesteads in that area. It's too rocky for farming and the grazing isn't good enough for ranching. Perfect place to hide stolen horses, though," Ethan mused, "especially if there's water." "There's a spring-fed creek that runs through those hills," Emma confirmed. "My father and I hunted elk there once." They quickly packed up their meager lunch and mounted, heading toward the distant smoke. As they drew closer, Ethan motioned for them to dismount and proceed on foot, leading their horses through a copse of aspen trees for cover. From the crest of a small ridge, they finally saw a crude cabin nestled against a rocky outcropping, with a corral behind it. Inside the corral, perhaps 15 horses milled about, including several with the distinct U.S. brand on their flanks. "That's them," Ethan whispered, excitement edging his voice. "Not all of them, but most." Emma counted 4 horses saddled and tied outside the cabin. "Looks like all 4 men are there." Ethan studied the layout, mentally calculating distances and angles. "We need to wait until nightfall," he decided. "Maybe they'll separate or some will leave. And if they don't, then we'll have to come up with another plan." Ethan's jaw set in a determined line. "But I'm not leaving without those horses." They retreated to a secluded spot about half a mile from the cabin, where they could observe without being seen. As the afternoon wore on, they took turns watching through the field glasses, noting the comings and goings of the outlaws. 2 men emerged at one point to check on the horses, then returned to the cabin. Otherwise, the hideout remained quiet. As dusk approached, Emma and Ethan shared the last of their jerky, sitting close together for warmth as the mountain air grew cooler. "What will you do after Fort Benton?" Emma asked, returning to their conversation from the previous night. Ethan was quiet for so long that Emma thought he might not answer. "I don't rightly know," he finally admitted. "I've been drifting so long, I'm not sure I remember how to stay put." He glanced at her. "What keeps you on your homestead, really? It can't just be a promise to your father." Emma drew her knees up to her chest, considering. "At first it was that, then it became about proving I could survive on my own." She plucked a blade of grass, twisting it between her fingers. "Now I think it's about belonging. That land knows me, every hill, every stream. In a world where I've lost everything else, it remains constant." Ethan's eyes held hers. "That's worth fighting for." "Yes," she agreed softly, "it is." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Then a movement near the cabin caught Ethan's attention. He grabbed the field glasses, focusing quickly. "2 of them are leaving," he reported, "riding south." Emma took the glasses from him, observing the remaining activity. The other 2 appear to be settling in for the night, one stoking the fire, the others checking the horses one last time. Ethan nodded, his expression hardening with resolve. "This is our best chance. We'll wait another hour for full dark, then make our move." As night fell over the mountains, they finalized their plan. Emma would create a diversion at the south end of the property, a small fire that would draw attention without risking the horses. Meanwhile, Ethan would approach from the north, neutralize any threat, and begin releasing the horses from the corral. "Remember what Sheriff Morgan said," Emma cautioned as they prepared to separate. "No unnecessary risks." Ethan checked his revolver one last time. "Just be careful. If anything goes wrong, you ride for Clearwater and bring back the sheriff." "You be careful too," Emma replied. She hesitated, then impulsively squeezed his hand. "I didn't find you beside that creek just to lose you to horse thieves." In the darkness, she couldn't see his expression, but she felt his hand tighten briefly around hers. "You won't lose me," he promised. They parted ways, Emma circling south while Ethan moved toward the northern approach to the cabin. The night was clear, stars brilliant in the vast Montana sky, with just enough moonlight to see by without being easily spotted. Emma reached her position and prepared her diversion, a small bundle of dry grass and twigs that would create smoke and flame without spreading. She waited until she judged Ethan had reached his position, then struck a lucifer match and set the bundle alight. The effect was immediate. As smoke rose into the night air, shouts came from the cabin. A figure emerged, rifle in hand, peering into the darkness toward the source of the smoke. "Fire!" the man yelled back to his companion. "Check the horses." Emma retreated into the shadows as the outlaw approached, his attention fixed on the small blaze she'd created. From her hiding place, she could see the second man hurrying toward the corral directly into Ethan's path. What happened next unfolded with frightening speed. A shout, a flash of gunfire, then more shots in rapid succession. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs as she drew her own rifle, trying to determine what was happening through the chaos. A figure staggered from behind the corral, one of the outlaws, clutching his shoulder. The man near Emma's position whirled and fired toward the corral, the muzzle flash momentarily illuminating his scarred face. The leader, she realized, the one Sheriff Morgan had described. Hadley. Emma heard Ethan shout, "It's over, drop your weapon." Instead of complying, the outlaw fired again, then dove behind a water trough for cover. More shots rang out, and the horses in the corral began to panic, whinnying and rushing back and forth along the fence. Emma circled carefully through the darkness, trying to get a clear view of the situation. She could see Ethan crouched behind a stack of lumber near the corral gate, exchanging fire with Hadley. The wounded outlaw had disappeared, either fled or seeking another angle of attack. Taking a steadying breath, Emma raised her rifle and fired a warning shot over Hadley's position. "You're surrounded," she called out, deepening her voice to sound like a man. "Throw down your gun." The distraction worked. As Hadley turned toward the new threat, Ethan lunged from his position and tackled the outlaw to the ground. The two men grappled in the dirt, fighting for control of Hadley's revolver. Emma ran forward, her rifle trained on the struggle, but she couldn't fire without risking hitting Ethan. She watched in horror as Hadley gained the upper hand, pressing his forearm against Ethan's throat. Without thinking, Emma reversed her rifle and brought the butt crashing down on Hadley's head. The outlaw collapsed atop Ethan, who shoved him aside with a gasp of relief. "Are you all right?" Emma asked, helping Ethan to his feet. "Thanks to you," he managed between ragged breaths. "Where's the other one?" "I don't know. He was wounded." A shot cracked through the night, and Emma felt a searing pain along her upper arm. She stumbled, dropping her rifle as Ethan pulled her behind the water trough. More shots followed, splintering wood inches from their heads. "You're hit," Ethan said, his voice tight with concern as he examined her arm in the dim light. "Just a graze," Emma assured him, though the wound burned like fire. "Where is he?" Ethan peered cautiously around the edge of the trough. "Behind those rocks near the cabin door. He's pinned us down." As if to emphasize his point, another bullet thudded into the trough, sending water trickling through a new hole. They were trapped with limited ammunition and an unknown amount of time before the other two gang members might return. "The horses," Emma whispered urgently. "If we can open the corral, create more chaos." Ethan nodded grimly. "It's risky, but it might work." He checked his revolver, 3 bullets left. "Cover me." Before Emma could protest, Ethan darted from behind the trough toward the corral gate. The wounded outlaw fired, the shot going wide as Emma leaned out and returned fire with Ethan's rifle. She couldn't see if she'd hit the man, but the momentary distraction was enough for Ethan to reach the gate and throw it open. The horses, already panicked by the gunfire, surged through the opening, thundering past the cabin in a cloud of dust and pounding hooves. In the confusion, Ethan circled back toward Emma, staying low. A cry of alarm came from near the cabin as the horses stampeded past. Taking advantage of the chaos, Ethan pulled Emma to her feet, and together they ran for the trees where they'd left their own mounts behind them. More shots rang out, but the darkness and confusion worked in their favor. They reached their horses, quickly untied them, and swung into the saddles. "Ride north," Ethan called over the commotion. "We can circle back for the remaining horses once we're clear." They galloped away from the cabin, the sounds of confusion fading behind them. Emma's arm throbbed with each movement, but the exhilaration of escape pushed the pain to the back of her mind. Beside her, Ethan rode like a man born to the saddle, guiding his chestnut gelding with confident hands over the unfamiliar terrain. After nearly a mile, they slowed to a trot, listening for sounds of pursuit. The night remained quiet except for the soft rhythm of their horses' hooves and the distant cry of an owl. "I think we lost them," Ethan said finally, reining in beside a small stream. "Let me see your arm." They dismounted, and Ethan helped Emma remove her jacket. In the moonlight, he examined the wound, a deep furrow across her upper arm that had bled enough to soak her sleeve but wasn't life-threatening. "Lucky," he murmured, using water from the stream to clean the wound. A few inches to the right. Emma winced as he worked. "What about you? Did he hit you?" "No," Ethan replied, though Emma noticed for the first time that his earlier wound had reopened, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. "Liar," she said softly, touching the spot. "You're bleeding too." Their eyes met in the moonlight, faces close enough that Emma could feel Ethan's breath on her cheek. For a heartbeat, she thought he might kiss her, almost wanted him to, but instead he pulled back slightly. "We need to bind these wounds and find shelter," he said, his voice rough. "It's too dangerous to return for the horses tonight," Emma nodded, ignoring a pang of disappointment. "There's a line shack about 2 miles north of here," she told him. "Trappers use it sometimes in winter. It should be empty this time of year." They remounted and rode slowly through the darkness, every sense alert for signs of pursuit. Emma led the way, navigating by stars and the faint landmarks visible in the moonlight. After nearly an hour of careful progress, they found the line shack, a crude, one-room structure built against a rocky slope. Inside was Spartan but dry, with a small fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and a single narrow cot. Ethan checked the perimeter while Emma gathered enough wood for a small fire, careful not to create too much smoke that might give away their position. By the flickering light of the flames, they tended each other's wounds. Ethan's hands were gentle as he wrapped a strip of clean cloth around Emma's arm, his fingers lingering perhaps longer than necessary against her skin. "Thank you," he said quietly as she finished rebinding his ribs. "You saved my life back there." "We saved each other," Emma corrected him, meeting his gaze. "That's what partners do." The word hung between them, partners. It implied something more lasting than their brief acquaintance, yet somehow felt right. "Partners," Ethan repeated, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I like the sound of that." They shared the last of their provisions and settled in for what remained of the night. Despite her exhaustion, Emma found sleep elusive, too aware of Ethan's presence beside her on the floor near the fire. They had agreed to take turns on the cot, but neither seemed inclined to use it, preferring to stay close to the warmth of the flames and perhaps to each other. "You think the horses will be all right?" she asked softly, staring into the dying embers. "They're smart animals," Ethan replied. "Most will probably stay together, find water. We can track them at first light." And then to Fort Benton, Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he finally said, "I have to complete the delivery." Emma nodded, though he couldn't see her face in the darkness. "Of course." The unspoken question, what happens after that, remained suspended between them as they drifted into uneasy sleep, the Montana wilderness keeping watch outside the thin walls of the shack. Dawn arrived with a chorus of birdsong and the distant bugling of an elk. Emma woke first, momentarily disoriented until the events of the previous night came flooding back. She sat up, wincing at the stiffness in her wounded arm, and found Ethan already awake, watching her from where he sat by the cold fireplace. "How long have you been up?" she asked, pushing hair from her face. "A while," he admitted. "How's the arm?" Emma flexed it experimentally. "Sore, but usable. Your ribs, I'll manage." Ethan stood, offering her a hand up. "We should get moving, find those horses before the Hadleys regroup." They stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The day promised to be clear and warm, perfect for tracking. After checking their own mounts, they set out, following the most likely route the stampeding horses would have taken. It didn't take long to find signs: trampled grass, disturbed earth, and eventually fresh droppings that indicated they were on the right trail. By mid-morning, they spotted the first group of horses, about 10 animals grazing peacefully in a small valley. "There's Duchess," Ethan said, pointing to a bay mare with a distinctive white blaze. His face lit up with genuine joy at the sight, making him look younger and carefree for a moment. Emma found herself smiling in response. "How will we get them all back to town?" she wondered aloud. "Army horses are trained to follow a lead mare," Ethan explained. "If we can catch Duchess, the others should fall in line." It took nearly an hour of patient work, but eventually, Ethan managed to approach Duchess with a handful of wild oats he'd found growing nearby. The mare remembered him, nickering softly as he slipped a makeshift rope halter over her head. True to his word, the other horses followed willingly when he led Duchess away. By early afternoon, they had located most of the missing horses, 20 in all, with only 3 still unaccounted for. Emma marveled at how easily the animals responded to Ethan, how his quiet confidence seemed to flow through the rope to the lead mare and then to the entire herd. "You have a gift with them," she observed as they began the long journey back to Clearwater. Ethan rode point, leading Duchess, while Emma brought up the rear to keep the herd together. "They understand honesty," Ethan replied. "Horses know if you respect them or just see them as tools." He patted Duchess's neck affectionately. "This one's special, though. Smart as any human I've known and twice as loyal." "Will you miss her when you deliver her to the fort?" Ethan's expression clouded. "More than I should, probably. Been thinking about asking if I could buy her when my contract's done, but an army officer's already claimed her." They rode in companionable silence for several miles, watchful for any sign of the Hadley gang but encountering none. As the sun began its westward descent, they decided to make camp in a protected hollow beside a small stream, the horses secured in a natural enclosure formed by fallen trees and boulders. While Emma gathered wood for a fire, Ethan checked each horse for injuries, speaking to them in low, soothing tones that carried across the quiet evening air. Watching him work, Emma felt something shift inside her, a recognition that this man belonged in her world in a way few others ever had. He understood the language of the land, respected its rhythms, valued the same things she did. As they sat beside the fire that night, sharing the small amount of food they'd gathered along the way, wild onions and a rabbit Ethan had managed to snare, Emma found herself contemplating a future she'd never considered before. "What will you do after Fort Benton?" she asked again, the question that had been lingering between them for days. Ethan gazed into the flames, his face thoughtful in the golden light. "I've been thinking about that," he said slowly. "For years, I've just been moving from job to job, place to place, never staying long enough to." He hesitated, to form attachments. Emma waited, sensing he had more to say, but lately, he continued, "I've been wondering what it might be like to stop running, find a place worth staying for." His eyes met hers across the fire. "Someone worth staying for." Emma's heart quickened. "And have you," she asked softly, "found such a place, such a person?" Ethan set aside his plate and moved to sit beside her. Gently, he took her hand in his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "I think I might have," he admitted. "Though it's happened so fast, I can scarcely believe it myself." Emma searched his face, looking for any sign of uncertainty. "We barely know each other," she reminded him, even as her own heart argued otherwise. "Don't we?" Ethan challenged softly. "I know you're brave enough to help a stranger without questioning what's in it for you. I know you love this land deeply enough to fight for it. I know you're skilled and smart and stronger than most men I've ridden with." His thumb traced a pattern on her palm. "What else do I need to know, Emma Foster?" The sound of her name on his lips sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cooling night air. "There are practical considerations," she said, struggling to maintain her composure. "My homestead needs work. The roof leaks in 3 places. The well needs deepening before next summer. The south fence is barely standing." Ethan smiled. "Are you offering me a job, Miss Foster?" "Perhaps I'm offering more than that," Emma replied, surprising herself with her boldness. "If you're interested." His smile faded, replaced by an intensity that took her breath away. I'm interested, he said quietly, leaning closer. Very interested. When his lips met hers, Emma felt as though something long missing had finally fallen into place. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but deepened as Ethan's hand moved to cradle her face. Emma responded with a passion that surprised them both, her fingers tangling in his hair as years of solitude and longing found release in his embrace. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since I first saw you, he admitted. Emma laughed softly. Even with tears streaming down my face and a rifle pointed at you, especially then. Ethan tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. You looked like an avenging angel. They sat together beside the fire as the stars wheeled overhead, planning a future neither had imagined possible just days before. Ethan would complete his delivery to Fort Benton, collecting the payment owed for the horses. Then, instead of seeking another contract, he would return to Emma's homestead to help with repairs, he insisted, though they both knew it was much more than that. The winters are harsh, Emma warned him, and summers can be brutal. It's not an easy life. I don't want easy, Ethan replied. I want real, I want meaningful. He kissed her again, briefly. I want you. As they settled down to sleep that night, still properly separated, but with their bedrolls closer together than strictly necessary, Emma felt a peace she hadn't known since her father's death. The future, always a solitary prospect before, now held possibilities that made her heart sing. The following afternoon, they rode into Clearwater with 20 recovered horses and a story that quickly spread through the small settlement. Sheriff Morgan was waiting at his office, eyebrows rising in surprise at the sight of the horse herd coming down the main street. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered as Ethan and Emma dismounted before him. You two actually did it. His gaze sharpened as he noted their bandaged wounds. Though not without cost, I see. They recounted their confrontation with the Hadley brothers, the sheriff nodding grimly as they described the cabin hideout. I'll send telegraphs to surrounding towns to watch for them, he promised. Sounds like you wounded at least one of them, which should slow them down. While Ethan arranged temporary accommodations for the horses at the town livery, Emma visited the telegraph office to send a message to Fort Benton, informing them of the recovered horses and the tragic death of Jimmy Wilson. That evening, they dined at the town's small restaurant, a luxury neither had enjoyed in some time. The owner, a widow named Mrs. Collins, served them tender venison steaks with potatoes and greens, eyeing them with undisguised curiosity as they sat close together at a corner table. People are talking, Emma observed, noticing the glances directed their way. Ethan followed her gaze, then shrugged. Let them talk. Small towns run on gossip. And what are they saying about us, do you think? That I'm the luckiest man in the territory, Ethan replied without hesitation. To have found someone like you, Emma blushed, still unused to such directness. They probably think I've lost my mind inviting a drifter to my homestead. Have you? Ethan asked, suddenly serious. Lost your mind, I mean. It's not too late to reconsider, Emma. I wouldn't hold it against you. Emma reached across the table and took his hand. The only thing I've lost is my fear of letting someone into my life again, she said softly, and I don't want that back. The next morning, a contingent of soldiers arrived from Fort Benton, an officer and 4 enlisted men, sent to collect the recovered horses and investigate Jimmy Wilson's death. Lieutenant Reed, a stiff-backed young man with a Boston accent, took Ethan's report with professional detachment. The Army appreciates your persistence in recovering the animals, Mr. Zachary, he said when Ethan had finished. And we regret the loss of Mr. Wilson. His family will be notified and his final wages delivered to them. Jimmy didn't have family, Ethan corrected quietly. He was an orphan, like me. Lieutenant Reed made a note. Then his wages will be donated to a suitable charity. He cleared his throat. As for your payment, the contract specified delivery by both you and Wilson. Under the circumstances, the Army is prepared to pay 3/4 of the agreed sum. Ethan's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Emma stepped forward. Mr. Zachary nearly died recovering those horses, she said firmly. He was wounded, hunted, and still managed to complete the delivery as promised. The loss of Mr. Wilson was tragic, but it doesn't diminish the value of the service rendered. The lieutenant regarded her with surprise, clearly unaccustomed to being addressed so directly by a woman. "And you are?" "Emma Foster. I assisted Mr. Zachary in recovering the horses." Lieutenant Reed glanced between them, then sighed. "Very well, full payment will be rendered." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a leather pouch. $800, as agreed. Ethan accepted the pouch with a nod. "Thank you, Lieutenant." He hesitated, then added, "There's a bay mare in the herd, White Blaze, 3 white socks. I was wondering if she might still be available for private purchase." Reed consulted his manifest. "That would be horse number 17. She's already been allocated to Captain Jameson as his personal mount." His expression softened slightly at Ethan's obvious disappointment. "I'm sorry, Mr. Zachary." As the soldiers prepared to depart with the horses, Ethan walked among the animals one last time, saying goodbye to each. When he reached Duchess, he spent several minutes stroking her neck and murmuring words only she could hear. The mare nudged his chest affectionately, as if understanding this was farewell. Emma watched from a distance, her heart aching for him. She knew what it meant to form bonds with animals, how sometimes they could fill the emptiness left by absent human connections. As the cavalry unit rode out of town, the bay mare looking back once as if searching for Ethan, Emma slipped her hand into his. "There will be other horses," she said softly. Ethan squeezed her hand. "I know." He turned to face her, the sadness in his eyes mingling with something warmer. "Ready to head home, home." The word carried a weight it hadn't before, a promise, a future, a shared destination. Emma nodded, smiling up at him. "More than ready." They left Clearwater late that morning, riding side by side along the Eastern Trail. The journey to Emma's homestead would take the better part of a day, but neither was in a hurry. They had provisions, good weather, and most importantly, each other. As they crested a rise overlooking a vast expanse of prairie, Ethan reined in his horse. "Beautiful country," he observed, gazing at the landscape unfolding before them, rolling grasslands dotted with stands of aspen and pine, distant mountains blue against the horizon. "It grows on you," Emma agreed. "When we first arrived, I thought it was the loneliest place on earth. Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." They continued their journey, talking easily of plans for the homestead, repairs to be made before winter, crops to be planted in spring, possibilities for expanding the livestock beyond Emma's single milk cow and handful of chickens. With Ethan's knowledge of horses, they might even start a small breeding operation in a year or two. Late in the day, as the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, Emma's cabin came into view, the small wooden structure nestled among cottonwoods, smoke rising lazily from the chimney. "Someone's there," Ethan said sharply, his hand moving to his revolver. Emma squinted, then relaxed. "It's just Mrs. Hanson. She checks on the place when I'm away for more than a day," she smiled. "Be prepared for questions. Martha Hanson is the most curious woman in the territory." Sure enough, a plump, gray-haired woman emerged from the cabin as they rode into the yard, her expression changing from concern to frank assessment as she spotted Ethan. "Emma Foster," she called out. "I was beginning to worry you'd met with trouble." Her gaze traveled over Ethan, taking in every detail. "Though it seems you found something else entirely." Emma dismounted, embracing the older woman warmly. "Martha, this is Ethan Zachary." "Ethan, Martha Hanson, my nearest neighbor and dearest friend." Ethan removed his hat, nodding politely. "Madam," Martha's eyes twinkled. "Well now, isn't he handsome?" she said to Emma, not bothering to lower her voice. "And those shoulders, he'll be useful come harvest time." "Martha," Emma protested, her cheeks flushing. The older woman laughed, unrepentant. "Oh, don't be silly, girl. I'm just saying what you're clearly thinking." She turned back to Ethan. "You planning on staying around these parts, Mr. Zachary?" "Yes, madam, if Emma will have me," Ethan replied, the sincerity in his voice silencing even Martha's teasing. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded approvingly. "Good, this one's been alone too long." She patted Emma's arm. "I've left stew on the stove and fresh bread on the table. John will be wondering where I've gotten to, so I'll leave you two to get settled." With a meaningful look at Emma, she added, "I expect a full accounting of this romance when you come for Sunday dinner." After Martha departed, riding away on her sturdy pony with one last knowing wave, Ethan and Emma stood in the yard, suddenly shy with each other now that they were truly alone. "She's quite a character," Ethan observed. Emma laughed. "Martha took me under her wing after Father died. She and John live about 3 miles west, close enough to help in an emergency, far enough to give me independence." She hesitated. She may be forward, but her heart's in the right place. "I like her," Ethan decided. "And I like that you have people who care about you." They unsaddled the horses and turned them into the small corral, where Emma's paint mare greeted the newcomer with curious nickering. Inside the cabin, they found Martha had been busy not only preparing food but sweeping floors, dusting surfaces, and even placing a small vase of wildflowers on the table. As they shared the hearty stew and fresh bread, sitting across from each other at Emma's small table, the magnitude of the change in their lives began to sink in. Just days ago, they had been strangers. Now they were planning a future together. "It's happening fast," Emma acknowledged, voicing the thought that had been hovering at the edge of her mind. "Perhaps we should take more time to be certain." Ethan considered this, his expression thoughtful. "You're right," he agreed finally. "I can sleep in the barn until we're sure of our feelings." "The barn," Emma repeated, surprised. "That's not what I meant." "What did you mean?" Emma struggled to articulate her concerns. "Just that, we barely know each other. What if a month from now we discover we can't live together? What if you grow restless and want to move on?" Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. "Emma, I've spent years moving from place to place, never feeling like I belonged anywhere, until now." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "But if you need time, I understand. I'll court you properly." Calls on the porch, chaperoned visits, the whole business. The image of Ethan formally courting her, perhaps with Martha Hanson as a stern chaperone, made Emma laugh despite her worries. "That seems rather unnecessary at this point," she admitted. "We've already faced bandits together." "True," Ethan agreed, smiling. "Most courtships don't involve gunfights or treating each other's wounds or recovering stolen horses." They were both laughing now, the tension broken. Emma rose from the table and moved around to Ethan's side, drawing him to his feet. "I don't need formal courtship," she said softly, looking up at him. "But perhaps we can agree to be patient with each other as we learn to live together. This will be an adjustment for both of us." Ethan's hands settled on her waist, warm and steady. "I can be patient," he promised, though the heat in his eyes suggested limits to that patience. "As long as we're clear on one thing." "What's that?" "I'm not sleeping in the barn," he murmured, bending to kiss her with an intensity that left no doubt about his feelings. Emma responded in kind, her arms winding around his neck as she gave herself over to the embrace. When they finally broke apart, breathless, she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "No," she agreed softly, "not the barn." The days that followed took on a pattern: mornings spent on essential chores around the homestead, afternoons dedicated to repairs and improvements. Ethan proved as capable as he'd claimed, tackling the leaking roof, reinforcing the sagging barn door, and beginning work on deepening the well before the dry season arrived. Emma watched him adapt to settled life with a mixture of admiration and surprise. He approached each task with the same quiet competence he'd shown with the horses, learning quickly and working tirelessly. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie gold and crimson, talking of their pasts and planning their future. She learned that he'd been the oldest of 4 children, that his mother had made the best apple pie in Lancaster County, that he'd once considered becoming a blacksmith before the war changed everything. He discovered her passion for books, the small collection she treasured and read over and over during long winter evenings, her dream of someday adding a proper library to the cabin. Their physical relationship evolved naturally, moving from tentative kisses to deeper intimacy with a sense of rightness that neither questioned. On their third night together, as moonlight spilled through the cabin window onto the bed they now shared, Ethan traced the curve of Emma's cheek with reverent fingers. "I never thought I'd find this," he confessed, his voice low in the darkness. "After everything I've seen, the war, the years drifting, I convinced myself I wasn't meant for happiness." Emma pressed her lips to his palm. "Perhaps we needed to understand loss before we could truly value what we've found." "Perhaps," Ethan agreed. He hesitated, then added, "I love you, Emma Foster. I think I have since that first day by the creek, though I didn't recognize it then." Emma's heart swelled at the words she'd been feeling but hadn't yet voiced. "I love you too," she whispered, the declaration both terrifying and liberating. Enough to face whatever comes. And challenges did come. 2 weeks after their return, a late spring storm brought freezing rain that threatened the young vegetable plants in Emma's garden. They worked together through the night, covering tender shoots with whatever they could find: blankets, old sacks, even Ethan's spare shirts, saving most of the crop that would see them through the coming winter. In early June, Martha and John Hanson hosted a gathering at their larger homestead, inviting the scattered neighbors from miles around. The occasion, ostensibly to celebrate the Hansons' 30th wedding anniversary, quickly became an opportunity for the community to meet and assess Ethan. Emma watched nervously as he was drawn into conversations with weather-beaten ranchers and hard-working farmers, men who valued actions over words and judged newcomers with careful scrutiny. By the end of the evening, when John Hanson clapped Ethan on the shoulder and offered him a special taste of homemade whiskey reserved for family and true friends, Emma knew he had been accepted. "They like you," she told him as they rode home beneath a canopy of stars. Ethan smiled. "They love you," he corrected. "I'm just fortunate enough to be with you." Later that night, as they lay together in the darkness, Ethan's arm draped protectively across her waist, Emma found herself contemplating how completely her life had transformed in just a few short weeks. The homestead, once merely a place of work and solitary existence, had become truly a home filled with shared laughter, quiet conversations, and a love she had never dared to imagine possible. "What are you thinking?" Ethan murmured, sensing her wakefulness. Emma turned in his arms to face him. "That I'm grateful I decided to hunt rabbits that day by Cottonwood Creek." Ethan pulled her closer. "So am I," he whispered against her hair, "more than you can know." As summer progressed into a glorious Montana autumn, their partnership deepened. Using part of the money from the Army contract, they purchased 6 good mares and a stallion, the beginning of the horse breeding operation they'd discussed. Ethan's knowledge and gentle way with the animals proved invaluable, and by September, 2 of the mares were in foal. They expanded the corral and began construction on a proper stable, with help from John Hanson and his sons on the heavier work. The project brought the community together, neighbors arriving with tools and supplies, sharing meals at the long, outdoor table Emma set up in the yard, offering advice and assistance freely. On a crisp October morning, as golden leaves drifted from the cottonwoods surrounding the homestead, Ethan approached Emma as she gathered eggs from the chicken coop. His expression was unusually serious, almost nervous. "Ride with me?" he asked, nodding toward the horses already saddled by the fence, curious. Emma agreed. They rode east across the prairie, climbing a gentle slope to a point overlooking the valley where their homestead nestled among the trees. The view was spectacular, autumn colors blazing across the landscape, distant mountains sharp against the clear blue sky. Ethan dismounted and helped Emma from her horse, though she needed no assistance. Taking her hand, he led her to the crest of the hill. "What do you think of this spot?" he asked. Emma looked around, appreciating the beauty of the location. "It's lovely. The view is magnificent." "I was thinking," Ethan continued, his voice betraying a hint of uncertainty, "that it might be a good place for a house." Emma turned to him, surprised. "A house, but we have the cabin." "The cabin is perfect for now," Ethan acknowledged, "but someday we might need more room." He squeezed her hand. "For a family." The word hung in the air between them, family, a possibility Emma had long ago resigned herself to never having. Are you asking me something, Ethan Zachary?" She said softly. In answer, Ethan reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object that caught the morning sunlight, a simple gold band. "I traded with Mr. Peterson at the general store in Clearwater," he explained, suddenly looking boyishly uncertain. "He had some jewelry his wife brought from St. Louis. It's not fancy, but—" "It's perfect," Emma whispered, her heart feeling too large for her chest. Ethan took a deep breath, then dropped to one knee before her. "Emma Foster, you found me at my lowest moment and offered kindness when I needed it most. You've given me a home, a purpose, and more love than I ever thought I'd know." His voice grew husky with emotion. "Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Tears blurred Emma's vision as she nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and gathered her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that spoke volumes. When they finally broke apart, Emma laughed through her tears. "Martha will be insufferable when she hears. She's been predicting this since the day you arrived." "Actually," Ethan admitted, looking slightly sheepish, "I already spoke to John and Martha about it. Wanted to do things properly since you have no father for me to ask." Emma's heart melted at this traditional gesture from a man who had already proven himself anything but conventional. "And what did they say?" John said it was about time. Martha cried, then started planning the wedding feast. Ethan grinned. "I think the entire county might be invited." They married on the first Sunday in November, beneath an arch of autumn branches erected in the Hansons' front yard. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, with John Hanson standing in for Emma's father and Martha serving as her matron of honor. Neighbors from miles around attended, bringing food, gifts, and genuine good wishes for the couple. Emma wore her mother's dress, carefully preserved all these years, ivory satin with lace at the collar and cuffs, altered slightly to fit her taller frame. Ethan, in a new suit purchased for the occasion, watched her walk toward him with an expression of such undisguised adoration that several of the older women dabbed at their eyes. The celebration continued well into the evening, with music provided by a fiddle player from Clearwater and dancing on a wooden platform constructed specially for the occasion. As twilight gathered, Ethan led Emma away from the merriment down to the quiet garden behind the Hanson home. "Happy?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. Emma leaned back against his chest, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied truthfully. "And you, any regrets about giving up the drifting life?" Ethan turned her in his arms to face him. "None," he said firmly. "When I lost Jimmy that day, I thought I'd lost everything worth caring about. I couldn't have imagined finding us." He touched her cheek gently. "You were right, when you said you found me. I just didn't understand then how completely you would save me." Emma kissed him, pouring all the love she felt into the gesture. Around them, the garden faded into shadow, but neither noticed, too absorbed in each other and the promise of their future together. Spring arrived the following year in a riot of wildflowers and new growth. The homestead had transformed over the winter, the stable completed, the cabin expanded with an additional room, the garden doubled in size. 3 healthy foals had been born to their mares, the first fruits of their breeding program, and word was spreading about the quality of Zachary horses. On a warm May evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emma placed Ethan's hand on her slightly rounded belly. His eyes widened in wonder as he understood her silent message. "Really?" he whispered, awe and joy mingling in his voice. Emma nodded, smiling at his reaction. The baby should arrive around Christmas, according to Martha's calculations. Ethan gathered her into a gentle embrace, mindful of her condition though she was hardly fragile. "I never thought I could be this happy," he murmured against her hair. "Thank you, Emma, for everything." As darkness settled over the Montana prairie, Emma leaned against her husband's shoulder, content in a way she had never imagined possible. From tragic beginnings beside Cottonwood Creek had grown a love that sustained them both, a partnership forged in adversity and strengthened by shared dreams. She thought of the day she'd found him grieving beside his horse, how close both of them had come to missing this chance at happiness. "Lost my friend," he had said in his moment of deepest sorrow. "You found me," she had replied. Not knowing then how prophetic those simple words would prove to be, they had indeed found each other and in doing so had found everything they hadn't known they were searching for.